Welcome to Machine Minds, where technology and humanity meet. I'm your host, Greg Tarusian, founder of Samson Rose, a recruiting and search business focused on the robotics and AI industries. The Machine Minds show is where we dive deep into the intricate world of robotics and artificial intelligence. As a staffing industry leader with a passion for the frontiers of technology, I'm pleased to be bringing you intimate conversations with the founders, investors, and trailblazers who are at the heart of the AI and robotics revolution. In each episode, we dig into their journeys, the applications of the products they're working on, and the breakthroughs that are shaping our future. Join us as we explore how these machine minds are transforming the way we live, work, and understand our world. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a tech enthusiast, or just curious about this amazing field, you'll learn something new with each episode. Let's delve into the extraordinary. Let's delve into machine minds. Hello and welcome to Machine Minds. I'm your host, Greg Tarusian, founder of Samson Rose, your robotics talent search partner. And on today's episode, I'm joined by Austin Spiegel, CTO of SIFT. Thanks for being on the show today, Austin.
Thanks for having me, Greg. I'm really excited to be here.
My pleasure. Let's jump into it. So look, you've had a fascinating career, notable companies like SpaceX and Riot Games. I'd like to set the stage here for the audience with you sharing some of your experiences and highlights from your experience, really, so they can hear about your background, know who they're listening to, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for that. I like to say that I'm kind of living my childhood dream. I got to work at a rocket company and a video game company. So check both those things off the list. But yeah, I think my path here, I wanted to study film in college, and I went to USC, and then I realized there were a lot of people who had a much more innate talent than I did. So I decided to study CS for games, which was kind of this interesting blend of computer science, which got to leverage my math and science skills, but also some classes in the cinema school with the interactive media department, basically designing and building games together. So the capstone of that program is actually building a game. And during my time there, I started to kind of realize that, a lot of folks who go into gaming are really passionate about gaming. And for me, gaming was something that I started to kind of lose interest in through college. And I kind of realized that, I wanted to maybe make, the actual world a better place rather than going and building some virtual world. So I was really fortunate. I was in an entrepreneurship organization at USC, and the managing director cold emailed Elon to come have dinner with 20 students that were in this organization, and Elon actually accepted the invitation. So this was in the fall of 2014. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. So, he was like an hour late, of course, because he's a busy man and LA traffic is brutal. But he came and he basically had like a Q&A session with us. Got to meet him, got to meet his chief of staff. And at that point, I had known what SpaceX was, but I think it really hadn't been as real to me as it was when he was kind of sitting right there in front of us and talking about, the challenges of Falcon 1 failing 3 times and how he motivated the team to go and do that a 4th time and then be successful. So through that, I actually applied for an internship at SpaceX, and ended up taking my final semester of school off, interned there for 6 months. Didn't necessarily want to return to school, but SpaceX was like, it's probably better to go get your degree before coming to work here.
Right.
So, that's kind of how I ended up at SpaceX. And then I ended up spending 5.5 years there, working on a variety of programs, basically supporting manufacturing for Falcon and Dragon and Starlink, and then working on tools for Starlink, like the Network Operating Center application, which basically manages the constellation, and then on the team that was responsible for all the telemetry software for collecting sensor data from all the Starlink satellites. So that was kind of my time at SpaceX, and then Riot, which seems like a total pivot, but understanding that I had studied CS for games, I just wanted to kind of do something else. I'd been at SpaceX for 5.5 years. It was 2020 as well. And I think, working from home for a few months, I started to go a little crazy. And I had friends working at Riot. So I decided to apply. And, I think the funny thing was, like, at the time that I was at USC as well, Riot's founded by some former SC grads. And Riot was kind of like the dream job for a lot of people in my program. So I applied and then, went to work there, leading a team that basically built development tools for a video game called Legends of Runeterra. So I like to say that it's like, I built manufacturing tools for rockets and I built manufacturing tools for games. The two things are vastly different, actually.
Yeah.
And I'd say, like, the big thing about Riot too was really seeing how different organizations do management and do leadership. SpaceX is so unique in that regard. And I think for me, as I knew I wanted to continue to develop, I was a lead software engineer at SpaceX, an engineering manager at Riot, and I knew I wanted to continue to develop as an engineering leader. So joining Riot and seeing that was, really important.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess that leads me on to my next question, or it's a nice stepping stone to that, because I was curious about like the lessons that you learned from those previous experiences and how they've kind of led you on this path or helped you into this CTO role.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, like, I think CTO at a Series A company is a pretty loose title. I think I'm a co-founder first. So that basically means wearing a lot of hats. But there are certainly values that I think I've taken away from both SpaceX and Riot that I like to apply to SIFT. And I think it's, like, important to note that, SpaceX and Riot are on very different ends of kind of the cultural spectrum of technology companies. So, from SpaceX, I think it was really being a product-oriented engineer. So about midway through my time at SpaceX, we had a very traditional software engineering organization, product managers, software engineers. But Elon Musk kind of looked at our organization and decided that product management wasn't necessary. So we unfortunately laid off all of the product managers. And then the burden of product management landed on all of the engineers. So I'd say that, while the product managers really helped us navigate some of these very, like, complex manufacturing problems, especially, some of the best work that our team did, or I guess the work that provided the most value, was done after this event, because it really kind of removed abstraction layers between the engineers and the end users. So the problems that were being solved were actually more applicable, or sorry, the solutions were more applicable to the problems that were being solved. And then you could also hold engineers accountable for building the correct solution. Whereas kind of in the previous organization, I think that accountability typically landed on product managers, and engineers were kind of shielded from that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
That's
a bold move. That's a bold move, getting rid of all the product management.
Yeah, it was definitely shocking. I'd say, like, going through, as an aside, like, going through 2 layoffs early in my career was great for character building, I think, and just getting used to things not always going the way that you expect them to go. Like, a lot of close friends of mine, like, lost their jobs, unfortunately. And fortunately, they're all fine now, but you kind of just got to get used to, things changing frequently and kind of rolling with the punches. So.
Interesting. Was there sorry, carry on.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
I was curious if there was, like, a pivotal moment or a decision in your career that led you down this path, like, of founding a company and working on something like SIFT.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because, I think I was always someone who enjoyed building things, like, loved Legos growing up, enjoyed watching how it's made, about manufacturing processes. But I never, didn't necessarily need to be a founder, like, never thought of myself as an entrepreneur. I think I really gained a unique perspective on many problems at SpaceX, and we built novel solutions to those problems. So I felt that, if I wanted to kind of realize the future that we kind of all, or at least I had thought we were going to have as a kid, right? Like flying cars and electric vehicles. I think there was some benefit to me bringing these novel solutions kind of to the marketplace and enabling other companies to kind of leverage the insights and the tools that we had at SpaceX. Um, and then I think specifically with regards to founding a company, like I like to kind of uh, equate it to like getting into the ocean. Like when you first get in, it's really cold, but the longer you spend, it gets a lot warmer. And I think just kind of progressively dipping your toe into it. And I can talk kind of about the founding story. I think we'll probably talk about that.
Yeah.
With respect to like how that worked, but just getting kind of more comfortable with it. And then at a certain point, you're just like, well, it's warmer in here than it is out there. So why would I get out?
Not that. Okay, so yeah, let's definitely shift gears and talk more about SIFT. And for the listeners who might not be familiar, can you break down what you guys do, what your product is?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think like, the high level is we're an observability platform for hardware sensor data. So I'll kind of talk about it in more technical terms. What we do is we ingest sensor data or telemetry from complex hardware. So think rockets, satellites, autonomous vehicles. And when I say sensor data, I mean, temperature, pressure, voltage, all of these types of things. So we ingest all of that data, we store it, we analyze it in real time so that we can provide customers with timely insights into what's happening within their vehicle or their device. And then we provide a purpose-built visualization, analysis, and reporting tool. So whereas I think, there are other observability platforms on the market that are really geared towards software, I think Datadog might be the one that people are most familiar with. We're building something that's really for hardware engineers, embedded software engineers, technicians who assemble and test parts, operators who operate complex vehicles. And the use cases there are much different from, how a software engineer would want to look at software deployed to a Kubernetes cluster.
Interesting. And I really do want to understand or hear about your origin story. So can you tell us about how the company got started and what kind of inspired you and your co-founders to go after this problem?
Yeah, definitely. So Karthik, my co-founder, he was a flight software engineer at SpaceX. But funny story about Karthik, actually. We both attended USC at the same time, but we were offset in the CS curriculum by a semester, so we never met each other.
Oh, no way.
But yeah, which is kind of funny. And we have a lot of mutual connections from USC as well. So like we know people who knew both of us. But he interviewed at SpaceX in 2018. I actually interviewed him for his role. He joined my team briefly, and then he transitioned off to Dragon flight software, which is basically the software that runs on the Dragon vehicle, which takes astronauts to the space station. And around 2019, Boeing had launched their Starliner capsule in their Demo 1 mission to the International Space Station. And it failed. Basically, what happened was there was, Karthik kind of understands this a little better than I do because he was much closer to this, but there was a problem with the internal clock on the capsule. And all of the kind of maneuvers that the Starliner was going to do as it moved towards the space station were based on this clock. So when it was 200 miles from the space station, it basically thought it was going to dock with the space station, and it expended all of its fuel and couldn't do the rest of the mission. And then there was another problem as well. So they had to, patch the flight software on orbit. So the mission failed. They returned the capsule to the ground, and NASA and Boeing did this massive, investigation into what happened. And from that, there were 60 or 70 different findings. They published a report, and the Dragonflight software team actually read through this entire report. And the takeaway was essentially that the kind of software and hardware validation processes were not correct. Specifically, in some cases, they couldn't run tests and collect data from tests that were long enough to simulate the entire mission. So that's one of the reasons that this event had occurred. And a lot of this, boiled down to like not having the correct data test or I guess I should say test and data review tools. So Karthik had been thinking about this idea. And then I had a taste of this solution at SpaceX for a bit of a different problem, Starlink. And in 2022, I left Riot, as I mentioned, wasn't a big gamer, enjoyed my time there, but ultimately realized like wasn't the place for me. And I knew I wanted to pivot back into kind of hardware or something hardware adjacent, essentially. So going to build software that serviced hardware. So I reconnected with Karthik. We had both, stayed in touch, and I knew that he was kind of well connected in the startup space, and I also knew I wanted to go early. So I kind of connected to him and asked him, what do you think is interesting right now? And he told me, well, you have this experience with these telemetry tools at SpaceX. There's all of these new aerospace companies popping up in Los Angeles. Why don't you go build this tool? And I was like, well, I don't really know where to start, to be honest with you. So what I started doing was, one was I interviewed at companies that would need the solution. And I learned that, they were basically looking to hire a team to go and build it. And then I started to contact people in my network and just lightly asking, if a product like this existed, do you think you would purchase it? So I started to gain a little conviction. And then I was at a recruiting event for a company called First Residence with Karan Talati. He's a former colleague of mine from SpaceX and a friend. And I met Scott Norman, who is a venture capitalist. He's a small fund called Earthrise. And he's actually a former SpaceXer. They invest in a lot of former SpaceXers as well. And I pitched this idea to him. And on the spot, he was really excited about it. He wanted to dig in. And I kind of told him like, okay, like let's hold off a little bit. This is really early days. But he introduced me then to kind of his network. And because he had been at SpaceX very early, he knew a lot of people who had founded these kind of next generation, aerospace companies. So Karthik and I started to, do interviews with these companies, and we kind of compiled a list of 30 or so different, potential customers, essentially. So people who would buy the software, what problems did they want to solve? How are they solving the problem today? How much would they be willing to spend on it? And through that whole process, we gained a lot of conviction that something needed to really be built here. So Karthik, he was the RE for a Dragon mission launching in June 2022. So he signed off his review for that launch, and then the next day he resigned, and we were off to the races.
Wow. So you were doing all of those interviews and everything like that beforehand?
Yes. Yeah. So before founding the company, we went out and did all of the interviews.
That's great.
I think the kind of initial thought that a lot of people would have in this space is like, well, why wouldn't you just use a tool, off-the-shelf tool to solve this problem, right? Like, why wouldn't you? There's a lot of visualization tools. So I think that's kind of the same impression I had. And like SpaceX is a bit unique in that it has a very incredibly large volume of data. So that's why I think, doing the interviews was like really kind of eye-opening. It was like, oh, this is not only a SpaceX problem. This is a really broad problem across all complex hardware engineering.
It's reinforcing a point that we've heard time and time again on the show about get out there into the real world, speak to your customers, build something that they need instead of trying to like build in a vacuum or being super stealth and then coming to market with something that people don't want. So doing that ahead of time before you even found the company is like, I think a great lesson for people to take, or a great nugget for people to take from this episode. So take some notes, people.
Yeah.
So
I do have one note on that too, because I think, we kind of took it a step further, and once we built the team, so we started building the team at the end of 22, and our first office, we actually sublet a suite in our first customer's office. So our first customer is a company called Parallel Systems, really cool company. They're building autonomous trains to move freight from ports to local warehouses to offset short haul trucking. and they had an extra suite in their office. So we moved our entire team in there. They had no commitment to using our software, but we basically built the software. We brought them into the office. We got their feedback on it. They shared some data with us, and we kind of iterated, with them in person for 3 months. And by the end of that, they were convinced that they needed to shut down their homegrown system and switch over to SIFT. So
Really? That's
yeah,
really cool. Love that. And I guess there's nothing like getting live and involve customer feedback and direction. So that just speaks volumes to it.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, well, firstly, how long have you guys been around? When were you founded?
So we founded the company in like June 22, and then we basically built up this, I'd say, like product roadmap, deck, product discovery document. We raised a pre-seed round, and then we started hiring folks. So we started hiring folks in end of 22, building the product. So yeah, basically like just almost 2.5 years.
Almost 2.5 years. So still fairly early, but I'm sure the company's evolved since then. And you mentioned, the CTO title is one thing, but you're very much a co-founder. So from that initial inception, those initial interviews and then going and raising the seed round, how's your role and how has the company evolved since the starting point?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when we started the company, obviously it was just Karthik and I. And the first thing we wanted to do was build the product. So we assembled a small engineering team of former colleagues. So we're really lucky to have, people that we had previously worked with that were super talented, commit to joining us at an early stage. And then we kind of experimented with early go-to-market hires, but we didn't really start building the go-to-market team in earnest until earlier this year, right around the time that we raised the Series A. So certainly, like, early on, it was mostly Karthik, as he's the CEO and more external facing, but then myself as well, and even engineers kind of involved in the sales cycle, and reaching out to people in our network, seeing if they'd want a demo, stuff like that. But I'd say my role generally has been a bit of everything. So early on, it was definitely more on the product side, product engineering side, writing a lot of code. As the team grew, I think I spent more time in engineering and product leadership capacities. So that's more like what I would say is hiring, product roadmap, engineering roadmap, architecture, technical decision making. And then at the beginning of this year, my focus was really on getting our existing customers successful with the tool. So one of our advisors told us, basically do everything in your power to make your first 10 customers successful. So basically, I took that as like just grind it out. Basically do the customer's job for them to some degree, so that they get value out of the tool and love to use the tool. And I think fortunately that paid off, because a lot of that feedback from customers, rolled into the fundraise. And then since the fundraise, it's really been about scaling the team, and specifically learning about disciplines that, I hadn't previously hired for. So customer success manager, product management, product designer, and then interviewing hundreds of people, basically for engineering and product and CSM roles.
That's great. And again, some good advice or guidance for people as well. That thing about making sure your first 10 customers are a success. I was listening to a podcast a while back just about like the Airbnb founders, and like their whole thing was do things that they're not scalable, but while you're small, like you can't physically do what you're doing for every single customer, but when you're small, when it's the first group of them, do what you need to do to make it a success. And I think they were like flying out to Airbnb host and doing everything, like hand holding to make sure it's a success. And same thing that you're talking about, making sure you do what the customer needs, even if it should be on them, just to make sure that you can get that positive feedback. And a lot of the times it's going to be obviously positive feedback, but then they're going to refer you. But then you're also going to see firsthand what needs to be solved, any bugs, any user experience issues or onboarding issues or anything like that. So I think that's super valuable too.
Yeah, it's all about learning, right? So
Yeah. And also at that early stage, like you said, feeding into your Series A, what better data point than having 10 happy customers do you need really for your investors to double down or new ones to come on board? So that makes a huge difference. Before we move on to a couple of other topics, if you had to pitch SIFT in a single sentence, emphasizing what makes you guys, what you do or what makes you different, how would you do that? What would you say?
yeah, I'm not the pitch guy, so I'll I think I'll go back to kind of what my initial one liner is, which is basically like observability platform for hardware sensor data. And I think the reason that I bring that up is because observability platforms I think are pretty well understood at this point. Like Datadog for hardware sensor data is also a kind of good comparison. Now, is it that exactly? No. But for someone who maybe doesn't fully understand the space, like it's a good way to put it.
But then to digest it, yeah, that makes sense. What kind of impact do you hope SIFT's going to have on the industry and also your customers, the businesses that use your technology?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think the way that I usually like to describe this, and again, I kind of always put it in a more technical way, but if you kind of think about
you are the
how,
CTO,
yeah. Well, I'm told sometimes that I should be less technical, so apologies if it's a little dry. But if you think about how software was developed in like the mid 2000s, so basically, companies would cut a release branch, and then they would run acceptance testing, all sorts of kind of QA processes, fix bugs on this release branch. And they probably would still be developing features on the release branch as well because development cycles were always behind. And then roughly 6 months later, they would kind of, deploy this kind of massive release that has all of these changes in it. And they would, cross their fingers and just hope that everything worked correctly. And inevitably there would be some bug or some problem that had to be resolved. And of course, like since then, we've kind of pivoted in the software industry to, continuous integration and continuous deployment. Basically, you're always building, you're always testing, you're always deploying your software. At SIFT, we deploy our software once a day, even more frequently than that sometimes. But what that effectively means is like, one, you can remedy problems a lot faster because you have the capability to deploy a lot faster. You're also deploying much smaller changes. So there's kind of like less variability or kind of like less unknowns. You generally know like, oh, the delta is actually much smaller. And I think this is kind of like, increase the pace of innovation in software. Whereas hardware, it's much more challenging to kind of build and test your hardware and your software integrated with your hardware. So think about, the SLS program, which has launched, I think, once or twice at this point, in comparison to Starship, right? SLS has been around for over a decade, and Starship now has launched, is it like 5 different times? And it was all about, iterative testing and development. So I kind of see SIFT as this tool that is enabling those iterative software-like development cycles in the kind of hardware industry. And that's kind of what I hope to, enable for our customers. So what does that mean? Like, well, accelerating time to market, right? Being able to deliver, products more quickly, but also like increasing reliability. So, ensuring that everything is actually working as expected. Very tangibly, like, what do I think we're going to do in the next year? Like, I think we're going to decrease launch cadences of vehicles for our customers. And I'm pretty excited to maybe share more about that soon, but I think that's something that could happen.
It's awesome. Powerful. I mean, we for people in the know again and in the industry, you hear about how, taking SpaceX as an example, how their development cycles are very different to like when NASA was doing it, for example, and basically enabling companies to do that at a smaller scale, utilizing your system, utilizing your tools is going to be super valuable, super valuable. So if we're looking ahead, kind of, you obviously mentioned in a year, there's some exciting things coming up. We'll have to stay tuned. So we'll put all the links in the show notes so people can keep a lookout. But if you look further ahead, like 5-10 years, do you guys have any ideas about how new markets or new additions that you are going to be adding to your tools, or where you see in the broader landscape SIFT fitting in for hardware engineering?
Yeah. I think there's kind of two angles here. So one is kind of like vertical expansion, right? Like covering more of the, when I say vertical, it's more of like within maybe aerospace engineering, for example, covering more software hardware engineer or software hardware integration challenges. We really see telemetry at the core of all software hardware integration challenges, because you need telemetry to understand whether or not your software and hardware are working correctly. But of course, there are like many adjacent tools that fit into this ecosystem. So whether that's tools for testing your hardware, tools for building your software, testing it and deploying it, configuration management software. Now, we're not necessarily, committing to solving all of these challenges. We are also very happy to like partner with, other extremely capable companies that are now being founded. But I think, there's this whole ecosystem of software that needs to be built to, continue to increase that cadence of hardware development. So that's one angle. I think the other angle is we have started to see a lot of early proof that the software is like broadly applicable. So it's not only servicing the aerospace industry, but we have early proof points in aviation, in transportation. So our goal is to, really double down on at least one of those verticals in the next year, and certainly, or one of those industries in the next year, and certainly more of them going forward. Because we think the tool, basically can work for any complex hardware engineering problem.
Obviously, there's a lot of buzz right now and a hype around like humanoid robots and things like that. Do you see value there if it was to become more commercial?
It's a really interesting question, because I think with respect to robotics, a lot of the challenges tend to be more with spatial data, right? So you have LiDARs, so you have point clouds, you have a lot of video, you have a lot of maybe you're rendering 3D spaces based on data from your sensors. So the tool right now is really built around temporal data, so time series data. But certainly we have customers that are doing perception. So for example, Parallel Systems, right? They're building an autonomous train. So, I think we're going to continue to kind of dabble in that space and potentially commit more, but we certainly have a lot of problems to just solve in the existing space. So we're not, we haven't really dove too deep into like humanoid robotics.
I'm curious. Well, I've just stop me if it just sounds ridiculous, but I'm thinking about some companies that I've spoken to that do like autonomous robots for places without that aren't manned, whether you're going down a mine for the first time, or underwater robots or things like that, or off-world robots as well. Is there value there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, for example, one of our customers, a company called Astrolab, they are building autonomous lunar rovers. Basically, that will be used, I believe, in the Artemis program. And I believe they're actually committed to being on the first Starship to the moon. So, we're working with customers like that, and there's a lot of value that we can provide to them.
Very cool. Very cool. Let's shift gears and talk more about team building and stuff like that. Because obviously, as the co-founder and CTO, you're deeply involved in building this engineering org, and you touched on a bit of that. Some of the team that you've been lucky enough to bring on board and work with. What do you look for when hiring talent now for SIFT?
Yeah, good question. I think, going back to kind of my big takeaway from SpaceX is like product orientation. So engineers who are kind of deeply interested in understanding the problem that they're solving for the customer, rather than, somebody who basically wants to build software for the sake of building software. I think my general perspective on software is it's kind of a means to an end. Now, of course, there's really interesting problems to solve, deeply technical problems, and we solve them here at SIFT. But ultimately, like, we're solving them in service of, the greater mission, which is enabling our customers to do incredible things with hardware. So I think product orientation is, our number one value. We kind of put it as customer experience first. And then second to that is kind of bias for action. So, is this somebody who is used to working in an environment where they're iterating quickly? They're pushing code. They're not necessarily concerned about making mistakes. And if they do make a mistake, they, understand that they can remedy that quickly. Those are, I think at an early stage startup especially, those are two really important skill sets. And then I think from a technical perspective, really it's more about practical skill sets than it is necessarily about, solving some esoteric algorithmic problem. So things like technical communication abilities, how do you break down a problem and present your solution to the team? The ability to collaborate with other members of the team in exercises like pair programming. The ability to grok a code base and get up to speed quickly. These are things that, of course, like, we want to see that you understand data structures and algorithms, and system design as well. That's a big part of our interview. But also, there's a lot of other practical skills that I think are underrated in interview processes.
Yeah, I'm curious about those because I always like to hear people's perspectives on the underrated side that are also crucial, or in your opinion, crucial for success in the industry. Are there any that come to mind?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, again, like, I think I'll harp on product orientation again, because I think, my big realization when I was interviewing, these companies for prior to founding SIFT was some of these companies were using low code tools to build software, especially like business or enterprise applications, right? So it may be more forms-based applications. And it kind of became apparent to me that either, I think software engineering is kind of going one of two ways. Either you become like deeply, deeply technical. So in the case of SIFT, that means building, big data systems to handle petabytes of sensor data, or you become very product oriented. And in some cases, because the tools are developing, not only low code tools, but now, with the advent of large language models, in some cases, I think someone who deeply understands a business problem and has very little software engineering experience, if any, is going to be able to build a better solution to that problem than a software engineer would. So that's why, we make product orientation such a big part of what we do, because we believe that, it's going to result in a better solution for the customer.
Yeah. Another great nugget to take. I think people miss that sometimes, when they're focusing on hiring the commercial or product focus instead of just like the technical side of things. That's super important, especially when you're building like a B2B product. Do you find it hard or challenging to get the right balance between like technical skill set and cultural fit, and then also like this vision that you're talking about?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, early stage company, you're asking people to take a lot of risk. They need to be aligned with the vision. They need to be mission oriented. So it's really challenging, especially in Los Angeles. We actually ran some numbers recently, and the kind of talent pool here in LA is about, for software engineering, is roughly a quarter of what it is in San Francisco, and half of what it is in Seattle. So, and we built the entire team here in LA. We really believe that it's important for our team to have in-person time to collaborate, and also it's important for us to be close to our customers. So that has made it really challenging. And we have a high bar technically, we have a high bar culturally. So all of those combinations of things have resulted in, let's just say me spending a majority of my last 3 months interviewing candidates. But I think also people that aren't the right fit for SIFT are still excellent engineers. It just takes a certain, I think, especially like risk orientation to join an early stage company like this.
Yeah, it definitely does. Yeah, you've got to keep it high, especially at first. You're the gatekeeper for what you need or the vision you have for the company. And then that's really going to, after you stop being as involved with that side of it, it should grow itself, but then keep everything that you've embedded from an early stage as you grow. So that's super important. Let's talk about the industry as a whole before we start wrapping up, because I know we're getting close on time. What are some of the trends in the hard tech space that excite you the most right now?
Yeah. So something that's kind of really close to my heart is my first project at SpaceX was as an intern actually was building a human machine interface, so an HMI for the Merlin machine shop to track basically machine utilization and technician efficiency, time spent doing different operations with machines. And the data from that work basically enabled industrial engineers to, reduce a single Merlin engine by, I believe, on the order of like 1,000 hours. So something that I always thought was super cool was just, manufacturing machines, machine shops. And it's really exciting to see a lot of these companies that are now trying to use software to enable traditional manufacturing processes to move quickly. So maybe companies like Hadrian that are doing, fully automated machine shops, or Senra Systems where they're trying to, use software to enable manufacturing wire harnessing faster. I think these are all like really interesting trends and definitely valuable as we talk more about, reshoring manufacturing in the US. So that's kind of one trend that excites me a lot. I think the other is just the proliferation of Starlink and having, you know, high bandwidth, low latency internet access anywhere in the world, I think is going to enable a lot of really unique and interesting businesses and use cases and products. So
Awesome. Awesome. Well, look, before we wrap, are there any final thoughts or pieces of advice for aspiring tech leaders or entrepreneurs who might be listening today?
yeah, I think in a sense I'm lucky because I made the right decision here. But when I was deciding whether or not to return to SpaceX, I also interviewed at Snap, and I think fortunately I decided to join SpaceX. And I think my big takeaway from that was, you know, early in my career or early in your career, work on really hard problems with really great teams, intelligent people that are really dedicated to the mission. And then that's how you're probably going to grow the fastest. So that's kind of my big takeaway. Yeah.
That's another great nugget, another great piece of advice. Thank you. Well, look, Austin, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for taking the time and sharing all of like your insights and about the company and the vision for the future. For our listeners who want to follow you guys and keep an eye out on what you mentioned that will be coming up, where can they find you and SIFT and connect with you guys?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can visit our website at siftstack.com. We have an awesome blog called Mission Critical, where we kind of publish customer stories, also technical information. And then you can follow us on LinkedIn, and you can connect with me on LinkedIn, or feel free to email me at austin@siftstack.com.
Perfect. Well, thanks again, Austin. This was fun, and I'll speak to you soon.
Yeah, thank you so much, Greg. Awesome.